fashion economists, welcome back to video 2 for chapter 7. I'm about to go through this slide right here. These are the characteristics that companies consider when selecting locations for global sourcing. So you are in the middle of this right now in your group project. You are selecting locations for global sourcing. So this should take away all of the mystery of what you should be looking at. What you see here is a decision tree, right? So at the top of the decision tree, these are the characteristics of countries that we're looking at, right? So when we're deciding where do we go to source our clothing, these are the characteristics. There is no mystery. This is exactly what you need to look at. I'm not asking for you to reinvent the wheel. I'm asking for you to look at this decision tree and make your decisions based on these factors. So they've grouped these factors into 2 different categories. The first off is by level of development. So we've talked about level of development quite a lot in this class, and level of development is determined by the GDP in the country. So you'll see a little bit more about this in your handout that I will go through with you momentarily. The other category is by geographic location. So what factors in the geography of that country or the distance between those 2 countries, what factors factor in, or what characteristics, factor into decision making when we're deciding where we're going to source our product from. So let's go through each of these one by one. Each of these are all of the different categories or factors that you'll have to think about, and I'm going to give you definitions of what all of these mean. So first off, we are going to talk about level of development. So overall stability and security. You'll see a map for this. I'm going to show you this in your handout in a moment, but we've actually already looked at these maps, this map in class. So overall stability and security, this is talking about, is the country, stable enough economically that they're not struggling with poverty, for example? Is the location secure, meaning are there bombs falling from the sky? Obviously, if a country is at war, this is not a good place to be sourcing from because people are fleeing for their lives and they are not making your clothes for American customers. That's just not the way that it's going to go, or wherever you're opening your group project store. So the overall stability and security are very, very important, and they're usually one of the very first things we think about. So for example, right now there's a lot of bombs falling in the Middle East. So we're probably not really going to be doing a lot of sourcing from the Middle East right now, especially not for clothing, even though they have rich oil reserves where we definitely are getting oil. The next one is bureaucratic efficiency. So in video 1, I described what bureaucracy was. In the name of time, I'm just going to keep pressing through here. So if a company or if a country has an effective bureaucracy, so all of that paperwork and laws make it easy to do business, that would also be another factor in deciding whether or not we wanted to source from that country. If there was a lot of red tape and paperwork, it's going to make it too hard to source from that country. So we're just not going to do it if we're a big fashion brand. The level of education can also be a factor in sourcing decisions. So typically, I like to remind people that you don't need a college degree to run a sewing machine, for example. So the level of education isn't always the main factor in sourcing decisions. However, how educated the population is in a country usually determines or is usually closely related to their level of income and how much each person gets paid. So oftentimes what we see is companies that are making fast fashion, they're usually sourcing in countries with a low level of education because they don't want to pay their workers very much. Whereas luxury brands are usually sourcing from countries with a high level of education because those are highly skilled workers that are required to make that product, and they get paid accordingly. Human rights is also another factor. So we want to make sure that people are being treated fairly in the country that we're entering. if that's important to your brand. Now, if you are a fast fashion brand, it should be becoming clear to you by this point that human rights do not matter to you. In fact, you might be looking for a very corrupt country to do business in so that you can exploit your labor so that you can get the lowest price for your customers. If you can't give your workers 28 cents an hour, then you can't offer the $4 t-shirt to your customer. On the other hand, if you're a luxury brand, you better be staying away from some of those places with poor human rights records because your customer is expecting that you have a conscience. And secondly, you can afford to pay those workers a little more. Infrastructure. We talked about this in lecture video 1. So I'll just reiterate that if they don't have proper communication availability or properly paved roads or well-developed ports to get your product in and out, you cannot source from that country because you will physically not be able to do that. And then labor cost. So this is another example where fast fashion companies would be looking for the lowest possible price on labor, whereas for a luxury brand, they don't really care that much about that. So labor cost, if you are a fast fashion brand, is going to be absolutely your number one concern. You are looking for the cheapest price you can possibly find at any cost. Let's move on to geographic location. So how far away two countries are apart will affect how much you pay for shipping. Obviously, the farther you go, the more you have to pay. So if you're a fast fashion brand, you're definitely going to be looking for a low shipping cost. And if you are a luxury brand, shipping cost is probably not as important to you. Shipping time is very, very important as well. So how long does it take to get products across the ocean, for example? So if you have a very fashion-forward product, you're selling fashion goods, speed to market is really important to you. So you're going to be looking for a very fast shipping time. If you are a country or if you're a company that sells basic items, so things that don't go out of fashion very quickly, so things like jeans or white t-shirts, for example, shipping time doesn't really matter because you can put those orders in well in advance because you know that customers are going to need those products next year no matter what. So you can count on the trend not to change while that product is, let's say, on a boat on the way from China. So if something takes 3 months to get to you, it doesn't really matter because the fashion level isn't that sensitive for basic goods. Cultural values and norms can also play a pretty big factor when we're deciding where we're going to source from. The reason this can be important is because, let's say, for example, there was a country with anti-American sentiment, and believe it or not, there are a lot of those out there. For example, Middle Eastern countries don't usually like America that much. That probably doesn't come as a surprise. So those differences in cultural values and norms is going to create a lot of problems for doing business. So if you're trying to source from one of those countries, they might not want to source with you. Another thing to think about, even if they do want to do business with you, so let's say China and America, there are certain customs that need to be observed when you're working in China. So for example, things like making sure that you bow respectfully instead of trying to shake somebody's hand can be really important. Also, you might think about how you address people and using the correct methods of addressing people. So, being respectful in how you talk to somebody. Import duties. So we've been talking a ton about this when we talked about trade. Reminder, import duties is the extra price you pay on top of the price of goods when you bring a shipment into the country. So if you are a fast fashion brand, obviously you want to find the lowest possible import duties that you can. And we actually looked at how to do that when we practiced using the HTS. If you are a luxury brand, import duties probably don't matter as much to you. Not as much as finding an exclusive and beautiful product. And then risks of natural disasters. So this might not be something that you had thought about before, but sourcing from a country that is at risk of a big earthquake or a volcano bursting or climate change, the water levels are rising. That's science. That's not an opinion. So if you're trying to source from an island nation, you might not want to start doing business with them if they're going to be underwater in the next few years. So you might think right now of some of the countries in the Philippines, for example. They have experienced some pretty awful hurricanes, earthquakes, that kind of thing recently. And so they're not a very secure place to be doing business because at any moment, their entire population could be in grave danger and their country could, be completely flooded by water. And so you don't want to be trying to get product out of there. It's going to be impossible. So all of this said, we're going to learn by doing. So let me show you how to fill in this ease of business or ease of doing business activity. There we go. So you're going to do some market research and fill in this table below. So first off, you're going to go to the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report. So you can click right on this link right here and it should open up a window for you. I happen to already have it open. There we go. There we are. So when you scroll down, you can see the ease of doing business rank right here, and you can actually toggle this pretty easily. So you see when I click here, it tells you what the worst place to do business is in. So Somalia right now, you're not really going to be able to do business there. It is considered one of the worst places to do business because it's just not easy. And you can see here that they're ranked really low for starting a business. It's hard to get construction permits. They don't have a lot of electricity, which is part of infrastructure. You can see that it's pretty difficult to register property. I'll remind you that this report is ranking all of these countries out of 190. So these are the lowest. So if you see a really high number, it means it's very difficult to do business there. On the other hand, if we click here, we can see that New Zealand is very easy to do business. So for example, they are listed number 1 overall. You can see that starting a business there, they're number 1, super easy. They're number 7 for construction permits. It's pretty easy to get construction there. They're actually number 48 for getting electricity, so maybe their electricity source isn't as secure as, for example, Korea or Hong Kong, but that's still not too bad. And you can see here that registering property, it's pretty easy to do. You can also toggle through some more of these criteria if you just scroll this way. So things like paying taxes, trading across the border, enforcing contracts, or resolving insolvency, which just means if you go bankrupt, how can you fix that? So you're going to go through and you are going to fill in this first column. So what are the 5 easiest places to do business? So you just put those in there. We already know here that New Zealand is one of them, right? So that gives you number 1. And then you're going to put in the level of development. So right here, it explains to you exactly how you figure out what the level of development is. And you'll have to go to Google here to find out what is the world average GDP per capita. You can put in those search terms, and then you're going to make the decision. Is this a developed country? So is the GDP significantly higher than the world average? Is it a developing country? So is it per capita is close to the average, or is it a newly developing country? And this should be reviewed from very early in the semester, and we've been talking about this quite a bit. Then you're going to figure out which of the geographic regions that country is in, and answer some of these questions based on some critical thinking. So you're going to have to think this through, and I know you can do it because we've been talking about this stuff for a while. Take your best crack at it and let me know if you have questions in the discussion board, okay? Where do I stop this recording?